is this still going on? This verse been going for way too long. If you're blind, you can see that this is wrong, and I won't comply. Not me, no way.
Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Christia Freeland has her mom tone and head tilt on, so I'll show that to you. You're welcome. Crystal clear business case for exporting LNG, especially to Europe and beyond, but especially in the context of the Russian war and all of that stuff that's going on. There's no business case to send Canadian liquid natural gas around the world. Are you kidding me? Come on. Really? And you don't want to build pipelines to Tidewater to make that quick and efficient and easy? Huh. Justin Trudeau, really? Really that incompetent? Yes, that incompetent on purpose, because that's what he's being told to do. Okay. Rouleau Commission, the commission that's looking at the Emergencies Act invocation and the Freedom Convoy, etc., etc. They're now accepting public responses to the Freedom Convoy. I'll give you that email address. Unvaccinated kids in Washington, D.C. will not be able to attend school after the 20th of September. As of the 20th of September, if they're not vaccinated, they won't be allowed to be attending in-person class, and they will have no online options available. So if you can't pay for education for yourself, you are SOL, right? And that's interesting because what about equity? What about equality? What about all of those things that all of the left tells us that we have to be in all things, period, except for unvaccinated people? They can be discriminated against because they're mean and we don't like them, I guess. Weird, right? Weird. Treat COVID like any other respiratory virus. That's said by Quebec. A doctor in Quebec in a press conference, and I thought that was interesting enough to point out. MAID, medically assisted dying, is offered on Saskatchewan's call-in service in Saskatchewan. If you dial 811, it connects you to their health services. And then option number 5 is the medically assisted dying email, or not an email box, voicemail box. So that seems a little impersonal, but there you go. That's what we've got. Fired nurses and hospital workers are starting legal action, but people are still being fired. I asked on the show, are people still being removed from their positions, even though we know this vaccine is not doing what they said previously it would do? And the answer is yes. Emphatically yes. They're being fired. They're being fired over and above the recommendations of the province of Ontario, etc. And it's causing a healthcare crisis, staffing crisis. What happens when there's nobody else to deliver the healthcare? What happens then? Are they going to still continue and double down on these bad policies that have created this crisis? It seems like they will. It really does. Task force to improve government services for Canadians. Remember when they announced that a couple of months back, when the passport offices couldn't get passports out, and when there were lineups at Service Ontario and Service Canada, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the solution was to get other ministers from other portfolios, other responsibilities to come and fix the failing ones. How's that worked out? Spoiler alert, badly. It has not worked out at all whatsoever. And it's not really that surprising, I don't think, but here we are. Okay, somebody also told me that I was zoomed in, and because I can't see, or I wasn't watching exactly, I couldn't see exactly how the screen looked. But then I looked back and I thought, yeah, it is really zoomed in. So I hope this is better. You can hopefully see the whole page now. So let's get into this. If you want to support the show, head over to CanadaPoly.com. You can check out the forums. They're free. And I got a new phone, and I store the passwords for this on a different LastPass than I do my personal LastPass, and the new phone debacle is just ridiculous. I was flashing the firmware and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll be back on the forums shortly. I have the passwords right here. I should just log in, but I haven't logged in yet because I've been traveling and trying to sort this out. So apologies. I'll be back on the forum probably later on today. But if you want to check out the forums, they're free. I'll be back on there later on today. You can do a one-time payment or a monthly subscription. I heard PayPal is giving a hard time with something. I tried to fix it yesterday. I did lots of updates. Please let me know if you're having trouble logging in and I'll help you, or if you're having trouble submitting or whatever. Sorry about that. I'll do my best to fix it. You can check out my book if you're interested in that. You can sign up for Kitchen Table Talks, which will be back soon. And you can click here to support the show by shopping at Amazon. If you shop at Amazon, no pressure though. I know some people don't like that. All right, let's get into it. Bloomberg is reporting Azoty drops as Polish fertilizer output halts on gas prices. So Shares of the country's leading chemical maker drop as much as 10%. Government says fertilizer stocks sufficient for sowing season. So they've got enough fertilizer, they say, but fertilizer production has stopped because of the price of natural gas, and that's interesting. Shares of Grupa Azoty SA tumbled after Poland's biggest chemical company halted production of nitrogen fertilizers and trimmed output of ammonia because of record gas prices. The current situation on the natural gas market that determines profitability of production is exceptional. They said in a statement Tuesday. It didn't say how long the measures would last. The firm's shares notched up an eighth day of declines, plummeting as much as 10% in Warsaw. It's interesting that among the same kind of backdrop in Canada, somebody pointed this out to me yesterday, this isn't my thinking here, that the fertilizer stocks have been going crazy in the face of a 30% decline. Is that just scarcity creating value, right? Maybe it is. But here, where in Warsaw, they have to start lowering production of fertilizer because it doesn't make sense for profit reasons. People are losing value in the company, which seems also counterintuitive to me, right? Because if scarcity drives value, then you would think that the value of that would be increasing the price, right? Oh, well, we got to get as much of that as we can, right? But not the case. Here's Christia Freeland. And the whole news broadcast on this is less than 2 minutes. It's very quick. And the video was working pretty well today, so we're going to give this a go. So Deputy PM Freeland responds to...
Freeland spent the day in Saskatchewan. She spent the morning at the Mosaic potash mine in Kalonzi.
It was there that she addressed the federal government's crackdown on fertilizer. John Flatters has the details.
The Deputy Prime Minister made a stop in Saskatchewan for a tour of the Mosaic potash facility in Colonsay.
Our government is absolutely committed to jobs, to economic growth.
There she spoke to the media about the importance of Canada's ability to supply strategic resources like potash.
It is an essential input when it comes to growing the food that feeds the world. And today it has become geopolitically essential. And that's one of the reasons I'm here.
The Deputy PM answered questions regarding the federal government's crackdown on fertilizer. She says farmers are ensuring they're using enough, but they're being economical about it.
I have a lot of confidence in the very good judgment of Canadian farmers in running their farms and in doing in the future what I know they're doing today, which is minimizing their use of fertilizer.
Health and Safety Manager at Colonsay Mosaic, Dustin Oros, says he's staying focused on what he can control instead of wondering about fertilizer restrictions.
I kind of keep a narrow focus on the operation here. I mean, it's real important for me to make sure we have a...
So I think it's funny that the whole plan is to not focus on the reduction in fertilizers that is wanted by the government, but is to focus just at the job at hand and not to think too much about the future. He says it's to focus on creating a safe and all of that work environment for the people at hand. And I'll play the rest of it out. Sorry, somebody was knocking on the door, so I had to stop. But this was my favorite part of the whole thing. I'm not going to think about the reported reduction. I'm not going to think about any of those things. I'm just going to keep a narrow focus on the job I have to do. That might be the problem. That might be the issue, or one of the main issues about why we're not dealing with the reality of the situation. Because if you have to deal with the reality of the situation, then that means you have to do something different than go to work, pay your bills, be a good citizen, et cetera, et cetera. It's different than that, and people are not willing to engage, willing to entertain that as an option. Here's the rest of this video.
Safe, healthy workplace for our people to come to work, to make sure we're meeting our targets, to make sure we are providing ourselves a very viable site to keep operating.
Freeland met with Saskatoon Mayor Charlie Clark in the afternoon before visiting Baba's Closet, a local Ukrainian donation center.
The whole fixation on Ukraine is very interesting, that no people in power, including Mr. Polyev, and we'll talk about that in the CPC section of the show, talks about how Ukrainian Independence Day is a very important thing. I would really like Canadian and Canada-focused leadership rather than leadership that's focused on international diplomacy and sending Canadians' taxpayer dollars to Ukraine for some strange reason, I'm not sure. And why every news broadcast needs to bring it up. Oh, goodness me. Here's the U of G scientist slams fertilizer emissions plan. So while Freeland and the guy who's working in the fertilizer plant in Saskatchewan want to keep a narrow focus, this guy's saying, hold on a second, this is kind of bunk, right? A scientist from Ontario's University of Guelph says the federal government is rushing its plan to cut greenhouse gas emissions from nitrogen fertilizer. Other scientists are concerned the current plan could contribute to the urban-rural divide where city dwellers view farmers as the bad guys who are trying to destroy the planet. I'm afraid when you rush things without a serious plan in place and proper funding in place, it's going to cause some harm. That's my fear, says the farmer who studied technologies and practices that reduce the need for synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. I don't want all of this to be on the back of farmers where they have to suddenly make changes. The federal government is pushing a plan where Canadian farmers reduce greenhouse gas emissions from nitrogen fertilizer by 30% relative to 2020 levels in the next 8 years. Yeah, I think it's too fast, too ignoring the reality of the situation we face. And the reality of the situation we face is that we can't feed all of the people who need feeding now with all of the technology we've built in farming. And reducing fertilizer use by 30% or reducing the synthetic nitrogen fertilizer by 30% will reduce the crop yields is pretty well the consensus I've heard. And doing that in the face of starving people, and there are starving people, seems silly. Even if your justification is, we're going to save the planet 100 years from now. Very skeptical about that. Very skeptical. They can't predict the weather next week. They can't predict the passport offices being destroyed or being overwhelmed. They can't predict, an energy crisis. But they can predict the weather 100 years from now? Color me skeptical. I don't think so. I'm a lot skeptical, okay? Here's Diane, and we're going to talk about the LNG. And she says, the ridiculous, embarrassing National Post has an article by Heather Exner stating that that it is impossible for an LNG port to be built in Canada, somehow overlooking the gigantic one already underway since being announced in 2018. One of the humongous modules has already been delivered to the site. LNG Canada is expected to be in production export in 2025. The current government gave the project tax breaks for the importation of the module, non-stop garbage from our foreign-owned press. So pipelines, well, this one's in progress, I guess, an LNG. Is this the BC LNG terminal? Might be. I've reported on that a few times, and yeah, it might just be, last I reported on, things were going well. I think Horgan even did announcements about it, right? So the LNG thing is happening. However, we could still be expanding on that, and not for hydrogen purposes. Here's Ottawa as well, just kind of keeping in with the LNG and energy thing. Ottawa signs an electric vehicle deal with Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen in Germany. Isn't it interesting? And Plato says, does Ottawa know Canada has an auto industry? Why help the competition in Germany? You have to wonder. That's our tax dollars going to Germany's auto sector, creating jobs in Germany. Right? Maybe some jobs in Canada too. But Justin Trudeau made sure everything was okay. See, on the 24th of August, he touched base with the Unifor national president. We'll work together to support workers, deliver results for them and their families, and to make sure no one is left behind. Let's keep in touch, Lana. And so there's a visual gag happening here if you're only listening. I heard Apple Podcasts was not picking up my stuff as well currently, so apologies if Apple Podcast is your medium. Welcome to a new medium. Telegram might be good. I don't know. But anyway, there's a visual gag where somebody's paying somebody else off or passing documents or something like that. So is that what's happening? Don't worry, everyone. Everyone will be taken care of, right? Mm-hmm. Here is Dan Albus, and we're talking about the task force. This task force was announced when? Dan Albus says, today we celebrate a 2-month anniversary of this announcement. We now need a task force to find the missing task force. And the news release was the Prime Minister announces new task force to improve government services for Canadians. And yeah, 18 hours ago, here is covering extreme backlog at Service Canada in Brampton. These new arrivals and foreign students and others have been queuing up for 6.5 hours in the heat. Most need social insurance numbers. At least the downpour is done. The downpour being, there was probably rain. I heard there was rain yesterday in Ontario. So yeah, very interesting stuff. Lots of people lined up for basic services. That's part of what I mean by the immigration lying to people and telling them there's opportunity and a well-run government here and you should come here and we'll take care of you and all of this other stuff. And then they get here and they don't have a social insurance number, and then they have to stand in a parking lot for 6.5 hours to get a social insurance number, and then they have to walk away because no guarantees that you'll get in that day, right? So it's really interesting to tell people, come to Canada for all the opportunities and blah blah blah, all this stuff, and we can't get the basics done. And to top it all off, the government, the Trudeau government, Trudeau himself, puts the image out to the world that everything's under control, we're all good. Anybody who thinks it's not or says it's not under control is obviously an extremist or needs to be investigated. Like the CBSA says it's investigating border officers spreading COVID-19 conspiracies online. I highlighted this on my show the other day. It was interesting. He was sitting there telling people what seemed to be very reasonable about conduct of border security guards and the custody of your personal paperwork like a passport. And the passport, he says, did say property of the government of Canada, but you are the rightful holder of that passport, and the government or the government's representative at the CBSA can't pass your information to another department. That's illegal. They have to pass it back to you. So he was offering advice about that. Is that COVID-19 conspiracy theories, right? He was talking about public health, etc. So he's being targeted for speaking out. I think that's interesting. I think that's notable. If somebody speaks out in an effective way, they get the press to go after them, to discredit them. So when people speak out, they go after them. They target them. And here's Matube, I guess. It says, like the way that cop from Durham is being investigated for talking about COVID, like the way that veteran who marched across Canada is being investigated for talking about COVID, like the way that doctor is being investigated for talking about COVID. You see a pattern, right? Yeah, I do. It's pretty wild. And it is terribly, terribly inappropriate, because silencing speech of people who have uncomfortable questions is not the way our country used to behave. Not at all. No, this is taking a minute because I have to go look for all of the things I was doing, or look for that last link. Did you know that in Newfoundland, food isn't expensive enough? The government wants to add a sugar tax. Yeah, this is June 29th, this was reported, but as I'm here, I just found out about it today. Controversy rages over upcoming Newfoundland sugar tax. This is what's happening in Canada. The new tax, which takes effect September 1st, will apply an extra 20 cents a liter to a wide range of products, including regular soft drinks and those with added sugar like fruit juices, iced tea, and lemonade, along with sweetened sports and energy drinks and some frozen fruit punches. So, very interesting. They did this in New York, and it was Mayor Bloomberg was the one who did it, and it was not very popular at the time. So we'll see if that sticks around in Newfoundland. It seems to be, I think that'd be an easy win for a lot of, for any Conservative Party to say, yeah, we'll remove that and get that popular support. Melissa Lanceman is saying a Canadian official tells a terrorist he's a great friend to Canada. Jibril Rajoub has been convicted of committing multiple terrorist attacks. He uses sports to incite hatred. FIFA agrees. A great friend. Will you denounce this, Melanie Joly? CC. So the tweet where these Canadian politicians are saying this person's a great friend was deleted after being called out by Melissa Lanceman. But they put this stuff out there, and until they get called out, they leave it out there. And that's our representatives, right? It's unbelievable. Christine says the Public Order Emergency Commission, also known as the Rouleau Commission, is now accepting comments from members of the public on their experiences, views, observations, and ideas about the federal government's response to the Freedom Convoy and use of the Emergencies Act. So the email address is perspectives at, it's complicated. It's poec-cedu.gc.ca. So that's the email account to send the email to. You're welcome. It seems a little, I don't know. You could have an online form, right? Like, I don't know. Now you have to have an email address, right? There's all sorts of barriers to communicating your displeasure with this. Here is just a quick climate change story. This is, I believe, a U.S., but it was run in a Canadian newspaper. Autoblog.com. It wasn't. I thought it was Auto Canada Drives or auto-something.ca. But this is a Chevy Bolt from a registered Chevrolet dealership for Bolt replacement battery. And so the battery cost $26,000, $26,853.99. So there you go. Put that under your Christmas tree this year if you want your Chevy Bolt to go to work. Otherwise, you're on transit, buddy boy. Back of the bus with you if you're unvaccinated. No, the rules changed. That's okay to do now. Get to the back of the bus. You unvaxxed person, you. See, this is, I would pause it to cut down on the time it takes to load. Oh, well. Smoother that way, but here we go. Maxime Bernier and Kelly Laurence. Kelly Laurence is the person who's making the phone call here. He says, press 5 if you want us to kill you. Medical assistance in dying is now just another option offered by the 811 health line in Saskatchewan. They're making it as quick and easy as possible to kill you. Yeah, it's a death cult. Listen to these two videos Kelly Laurence made and Maxime Bernier is posting. He says that Maxime Bernier made with Kelly Laurence, but I don't hear Maxime in the background, so I don't know. Here he is dialing in, and actually I'll start it a little bit further in because it is more interesting actually once it gets into the options. Here we go.
If you choose to use abusive language, it will result in a termination of the call. If you are looking to book an appointment for the flu or COVID vaccine, please go to www.forflu.ca or call the SASK booking line at 1-833-727-5829. Please listen carefully as our menu options have changed. Press 1 if your call is COVID-19 related. Press 2 if you wish to speak to a registered nurse for all other concerns. Press 3 if you wish to speak to a mental health and addictions clinician. Press 4 if you wish to speak to poison control. Press 5 if you wish to leave a message with the Medical Assistance in Dying program.
I think leaving a message with the Medically Assisted in Dying program is probably the funniest part of this, if there's a funny part. I mean, there's always a funny part, even if it's uncomfortable. Carrying on. Meanwhile, you may have to wait months or years before you can see a specialist or get a needed surgery. Death Cult Part 2. So this is 50 seconds. Here we go.
Program with the Saskatchewan Health Authority. I'm sorry that we've missed your call. Please leave a detail.
If you are looking to press 1 to be transferred to poison control. Press 2 to leave a message with the Medical Assistance in Dying program. To return to the main menu.
Hello, you have reached the confidential voicemail box of the Provincial Medical Assistance in Dying program with the Saskatchewan Health Authority. I'm sorry that we've missed your call. Please leave a detailed message and your call will be returned during our regular business hours, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m.
Your death is important to us, but we only work office hours. Please leave a message. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. So the Guelph Hospital, the Guelph General Hospital, lost 22 healthcare workers, and when at the beginning of this whole thing, 2 vax mandates. And now the Guelph General Hospital is using private agency nurses to maintain the staffing needed to run the hospital in the emergency section. So here's the Guelph Today article on that. Guelph General using a handful of private agency nurses. As some hospitals are being forced to use significant numbers of nurses from private agencies, Guelph General Hospital is using just 4 private nurses in its emergency department right now. I wonder how many it's using for the whole hospital. They're just saying just 4 in its emergency department, but is that the total number of nurses used by the Guelph General? The four nurses have been provided education and training to help support the emergency department, said Melissa Skinner. Guelph General Hospital Vice President of Patient Services and Chief Nursing Executive, in an email. The nurses will cover 23 shifts between August 19th to September 25th. This averages out to about 6 12-hour shifts per week. 6 12-hour shifts per week. I'm just doing a quick calculation here, and I know that a week has 7 days. And I also know that a day has 24 hours in the day. And if you do 6 12-hour days, that's a lot of the week, right? Out of 7 days, that's most of the week with just 1 day left over. And out of 24 hours, 12 hours working plus, let's say 40 minutes for commute, both ways, right? 40 minutes in, 40 minutes out. That's a lot more than most of the day working 12 hours. I used to do 12-hour shifts. I wouldn't recommend it. So I just think it's interesting that they're trying to make this seem like, oh, Guelph General is just using a little bit of this. You've got 4 nurses working flat out. That is not a little bit of extra help. That is, you are the cornerstone of our department. 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts. You're the cornerstone of our department. Nice to see you again, Karen. Without you, this place would fall apart. I know. See you on the 26th. Oh, no, you won't, because the contract's run out. Oh, now the contract price is increased. How much does that cost Ontario taxpayers like me, right? Seems crazy, seems insane, seems like how come we're not getting healthcare workers who are trained and already up to speed and already able to work in the province back in the roles that they were previously filling. And some people say, no, they don't want their jobs back. Some of them do. Some of them do. I'll show you. There's billboards and people asking for their jobs back. So some of them do. And I think that if you don't go back to the same hospital that fired you, which I can understand completely, you might want the option to get hired in a private place or a place that is in a different province. Say you moved provinces, you had a different opportunity and you went somewhere else, and then you decide, you know, I really like that nursing thing. I think I'm going to get back into it, you know, or something to that effect. And I think you should have the option. And I'm not saying that you should be forced, but I think that maybe if you worked there for 13 years or 17 years or 20 years, you should have a severance. You should have something for your time and trouble, right? Nurse Freedom says unvaccinated doctors asked for their jobs back on a billboard in West Kelowna. See, 50 terminated unvaccinated BC doctors are willing to serve you, the public, today. Allow us to do our part and help BC's collapsing healthcare. What happens if healthcare completely collapses? I'm saying this like it's a thing that hasn't happened already and we're watching in real time. Right? But what happens, honestly, when healthcare is something that you cannot rely on because of the incompetence of the people who are supposedly leading us? What then? Who do you hold accountable when the only people there are saying, well, unvaccinated people have to stay outside in the rain or whatever, right? And yes, we understand our services are falling apart, but our paychecks are still clearing, so we're not going to do anything different, right? Canadian trained nurses with integrity continue to get fired in order to create an artificial crisis so that fake Braveheart Pierre and the rest of the Ottawa swamp can fast track the importation of 26,000 foreign trained nurses. Here is an Ontario nurse who's been fired in the last week. Here we go.
I'm just leaving the hospital that I was fired from last week, and they wanted all their hospital property back. The reason I was fired was because, I refused the COVID-19 injections, and they decided to take my career because of it. Anyway, it's August of 2022, and I just wanted to come on and let everybody know that, yes, Ontario hospitals are still firing hospital employees. I'm a nurse, and I have never seen or witnessed such a nursing shortage in my entire career, and I've been working for 15 years. I've never seen it so bad. It's a 3-to-1 ratio in the pediatric critical care unit. Normally it's 1-to-1, 1 nurse per 1 patient, so that's pretty unsafe, if you ask me. ICU in London, we're operating 20 nurses short than they normally do, which is about 50%, I've heard. In any case, it's completely irresponsible what they're doing, continuing to fire healthcare workers, and the media is, picking up only part of the story. They're failing to let the public know that they're still firing willing and able healthcare workers, despite what we know about this vaccine, and it being no longer, or I guess it never was, effective against infection and transmission. So anyway, the whole thing is nonsense. It's irresponsible. Our healthcare system is bleeding, and they continue this charade. So anyway, have a listen to the next video and you'll see.
I don't have the next video, but fundamentally, I don't disagree with anything that she's saying. We're watching our healthcare system implode, and they're saying, all that we need to do is increase immigration, and that will solve this problem. Really. Power says a group of 20 City of Windsor employees have commenced legal action against the City of Windsor for breach of their constitutional rights. Read the statement of claim. It's the same thing. The fired healthcare workers and other workers who the employer acted outside of their rights, without the rights to do what they've done. And now the legal comeuppance is slowly grinding its way through the courts. Will we see these people be made whole? I don't know. What happens when the healthcare system collapses? That's not good. It's not good. Chris says, it appears as though the argument for masks to return is once again to avoid burdening the hospitals. The same argument when they said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. No capacity increase, fire thousands, and policy failures everywhere. Also, where did all the money go? Where did all the money go? I'd love to know where the money went. It's not into healthcare. That's for darn sure. That's for absolute certainty. It's probably into enforcement. Here's that Quebec doctor I was talking about, Dr. Caroline Quash, chair of Quebec's Immunization Committee, at today's Quebec government COVID update. Severity of COVID disease in children is actually less than influenza. We'll have to treat the virus as all others. Here's that video.
Covered all the needs of the population.
Thank you. And my second question is for Dr. Quash. I believe you mentioned in French that when it comes to COVID in schools and with children, it might be time to treat it more like other respiratory viruses. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Well, what I meant is we see complications arising from other respiratory viruses, be it influenza, RSV. What we've seen in terms of severity of COVID disease in children is that it is actually less than influenza for most age groups in terms of rates of hospitalization. And so at one point in time, we'll have to treat this virus as all the others and not be as stringent in trying to see where it's coming from, trying to prevent its transmission completely, mainly because we now have, most of us, underlying immunity, be it through vaccination and or previous infection. So we're at this turning point where, we're not far from just saying COVID or RSV or enterovirus. I'm not going to know. It's a respiratory virus, and we think that children are going to cope with it pretty well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So wild, right? That's the kind of stuff that'll get you removed off YouTube last year. Apparently YouTube changed their algorithm or changed their rules. So that's interesting. We'll see how my new channel does. LOL. Douglas says, according to DC Mayor Bowser, yes, her name is Mayor Bowser, unvaccinated students will not be allowed in school, and nor will there be virtual learning. They will be denied an education. So the first 20 days are a grace period. After that, then they're kicked out of school and there's no virtual learning. They just have to comply. And there's undertones of, if you don't comply, they're going to call the children's aid on you. Really. And nobody's articulated that, but people have said the parents need to do what they need to do and we'll do what we need to do type deal. That's the language they're using. And to somebody who is in the in that kind of world, that's as direct a threat as you can get. We'll do what we need to do, because if you know that there's abuse taking place, you have a moral obligation, but there's more than a moral obligation. There's a legal obligation to report it. So if you're in a teacher role or something to that effect, if they make not vaccinating your child something that is harmful to your child, and they say to the teacher, you have a legal obligation, and if you don't report children who are unvaccinated to the principal, to be reported to public health, to be dealt with in the way that we see fit, then you will be legally responsible for not reporting that child. Do you understand how insidious this is? That's how insidious. Scary. Here's Mike Hart, and he's reading a statement. He says, I highly urge Western University to reverse its decision requiring all students to become boosted before beginning this fall semester. And it's a 2-minute video. I'm not going to play this one. It's the same thing. Most people who went to Western, or there were a bunch of high profile, Matt Strauss is another one, doctors talking about how the vaccine mandate, booster mandate for access to education is unacceptable and they shouldn't be doing this. And they don't care. They don't care. They don't care, and they're not going to change it. So that's my prediction. We'll see if they bow to the pressure. The students are protesting too. We'll see. We'll see. Whittingston says, Walensky, we had to make important decisions at imperfect times with imperfect data. But that's not what they said before, right? The aftermath says all of a sudden it was imperfect data, but back then it was the science, and they lied and manipulated from the beginning along with the ELF and others, right? Tony Fauci and the rest of these people who lied on news broadcasts to the entire anybody who would listen to them about safe and effective, and if you get this, you won't get sick. And in Canadian media, the things that we did, the things that we allowed these people to do are unbelievable. And if you don't think that we aren't already living under petty tyrants, have a read through this balaclava thread. He says, we seem to be reaching the stage of the COVID debacle when all of the authoritarians are trying to memory hole all the awful things that they did. We need to make sure that the awful things, we need to make sure that that we never forget. Remember when they arrested people for sitting in a park or going to the beach? This was in paddleboarder, chased by boat, arrested in Malibu after flouting coronavirus closures. Wild. Remember when they salted and sanded ice rinks to prevent people from using them? What an absolute heartless thing to do. Absolutely heartless. Remember when they banned low-risk kids from school for months at a time and taped off play structures and parks? That didn't last very long because everybody said absolutely not. Remember when people would get assaulted or arrested for not wearing masks outside at ski resorts? I couldn't believe this video where this guy gets tackled on a snowboard by security. Just unbelievable. It was shameful, absolutely shameful. Or at the graves of the loved ones, an Australian man wearing a mask is arrested by a swarm of armed thugs for the COVID crime of visiting his family's grave. The man who filmed this disgrace is then interrogated by police. Yeah. Remember the time Quebec instituted a curfew twice? Remember when interprovincial travel was banned? Remember capacity limits in your own home or even backyard? Yeah. Remember how all mom and pop stores had to close for weeks or months, but the big box stores could be packed with people? Sometimes they even blocked off non-essential items, non-essential shopping bans. Do you remember all of that? That was absolutely wild. Remember how in restaurants the virus could only get to you if you were standing but not while seated? California got it right though, right? Remember winter outdoor or indoor silent lunches at school? There is awful things that we allowed to happen, and not just in Canada, all over the place. And that doesn't make it better. It just means that we need to stand up for ourselves better. Ranley says unknown cause of death is the leading cause. This is JP picking up the Alberta news piece that unknown cause of death is the leading cause of death in Alberta. Unknown, we don't know what happened. Oh yeah, it just dropped dead suddenly, right? Seeing a whole bunch of that lately. Very strange. Let's talk about censorship. Stephen Deese says whether the Biden White House trying to get Alex Brenson banned or the FBI telling Facebook to censor Hunter Biden's laptop, we now have multiple confirmations across multiple platforms that government is trying to use private entities to impose censorship like it did the jab. Yeah, very interesting because we're seeing that in Canada. We've got the Dr. Shiva lawsuit against Twitter, and now this on Facebook. This is just wild. Check this out. This is an interview with Joe Rogan, and Mark Zuckerberg talks about algorithmically censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story based on the general request from the FBI.
How do you guys handle things when they're
the videos were working so well?
A big news item that's controversial. Like there was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post.
We have that too.
Hold on a second. Okay, I think it'll work better this way. Here we go.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. I mean, basically, the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful. But I mean, basically, a lot of people were still able to share it. We got a lot of complaints that was the case. Obviously this is a hyper political issue, so depending on what side of the political spectrum, you either think we didn't censor it enough or censored it way too much. But we weren't sort of as black and white about it as Twitter. We just kind of thought, hey, look, if the FBI, which I still view as a legitimate institution in this country, it's like very professional law enforcement, if they come to us and tell us that we need to be on guard about something, then I want to take that seriously.
Did they specifically say you need to be on guard about that story?
No, I don't remember if it was that specifically, but it basically fit the pattern.
So it's really interesting. He says,
how do you guys handle things when they're...
He says, he says that they got a lot of complaints about how many times it was shared, and depending on which side of the political spectrum you were on, depended on, whether it was too much or too little. I'm wondering if it was FBI and not FBI. Like, we got a lot of complaints from the FBI that it was shared too much, but depending on what side of the political spectrum you were on, blah, blah, blah. Very interesting when you consider the timing of the laptop from hell and the fact that we've got Twitter saying that they censored it and Facebook saying that they censored it at the behest of the FBI. How can you think that we have a not managed media that's not completely propaganda top to bottom? That's the only conclusion I can draw. There is no other conclusion as far as I can tell, unless more information comes to light that somehow people are reporting things because they smell a story and they go investigate and say, hey, did you know? But most of the time, the FBI comes to you and tells you, hey, man, you own this website and you better censor that or you're not going to own this website for much longer. Justin Trudeau says, the pattern of harassment of journalists is incredibly alarming and completely unacceptable. This type of behavior has no place in our society. No journalist should ever be threatened for doing their job. And Viva Frei and Ezra Levent and all sorts of other people point out the hypocrisy of this statement to Justin Trudeau because his biggest enemy is the press, right? He hates a free press. He does not want free press at all. Look at the amount of censorship that I've received just from reading the headline news. That's it. Viva Frei says, your police and bodyguards assaulted 3 rebel news journalists, and then he names them. While you repeatedly publicly demonize the news agency, journalists should not be harassed, threatened, or assaulted, and you should resign. I agree. There's a whole bunch of other people who push back on that, so if you're interested in that story, there's lots more to find there. But Justin Trudeau is just jaw-droppingly egotistical, egomaniacal. Pierre Poilievre, this is the CPC race. If you wanted Pierre Poilievre to be your guy, if you thought Pierre Poilievre is the guy to break through, he's reasonable, he's rational, everything he says makes sense. Here's his tweet from the 24th. He says, 31 years ago, Ukraine won its independence from the communist Soviet Union. Today, they are once again fighting Russian aggression to defend their freedom. As they've proven repeatedly, the Ukrainian people are strong, they're resilient, they will be victorious. And Jade says, either you're spectacularly uninformed or your team is trying to sabotage your campaign. I don't believe you're that uninformed. How much money have we sent to Ukraine? $3.1 billion. Man, I wonder how much fresh water that could have bought for First Nations reserves. Hey, Justin? Goodness me. Transparency, eh? Dr. Leslyn Lewis also says, it's easier. It's easier for people to attack people electronically than have a conversation. Unfortunately, that's what Scott Aitchison has chosen to do. He has attacked me publicly. So here is my public response. And so there's drama in the CPC race, but I don't really care about it all that much. People have already sent in their ballots, and John Sherry's going to win. I hope not, but it'd be interesting to see. It'll be very interesting to see. I hope not. I mean, who cares really? But if Pierre Poilievre wins and then wins the prime ministership and isn't on the payroll of the WEF or somehow related to the WEF, John Baird, I'll be surprised. If he fixes things, I'll be very happy. But I'm not holding my breath. It doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like that from the first tweet. This is a person asking Mr. Poilievre about his picture with Bill Gates, his WEF ties. The weird part about this for me is his wife answers. And it's, I mean, okay, fine, fair enough. But I don't know. It was weird. I thought it was weird. Here it is. Maybe. Usually I'd pause it until it started, but it's not working. Anyway, if you want to watch Mr. Poilievre's wife answer the question, then you should go check out that video listed in the description. Mike says, Ottawa's approach to anti-racism is like asking big tobacco to cure cancer. And I just closed that, but I wasn't actually going to go through it very much. The racists being funded by Heritage Canada is an interesting story, but even more interesting is that they knew it and nobody wants to take responsibility for it. Mark Goldberg says, I found at least 11 tweets between mid-April and the end of July that warned Canadian Heritage and Pablo Rodriguez, as well as opposition members Julian, and he names them, among others from both sides. And he's got receipts, he's got emails, he's got all sorts of stuff showing him telling these people that you are funding somebody who is saying things publicly that you cannot possibly support. They knew about this. And Pablo Rodriguez says, it's not my problem. And Ahmed Hassan, who's the current minister of racism, says it's not my problem either. So Dan Albus says, blame someone else. The hallmark trait of most of Trudeau's cabinet. Hassan officials says, Heritage funding for the CMAC anti-racism project was approved before he became the diversity minister last fall. Did I say racism minister? Sorry. So he says, not my problem. Hot potato, right? And he passes it off to Pablo Rodriguez. Pablo Rodriguez, Michael Geist says, the return to sender response to this letter from Canadian Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez is something, not even one word of concern or accountability. So Rachel says, the Liberal Heritage Minister's department gave $130,000 to an anti-Semite to teach Canadians about anti-racism, which is racism, by the way. I called him out on it in this letter. His office responded below telling me to address this with someone else, but this is his department. LOL, right? So they don't want to solve the problem. They just want to say, if you have a problem, you are the problem. And that is how you win elections in Canada. Another Liberal scandal. Now that the truth has come out, and we find that Maroof and his high-profile wife are the CMAC, will this incompetent minister resign? Minister was warned about the consultant's anti-Semitic tweets before news broke. So is anybody responsible for this? Nobody's responsible for this. Not Justin, not Pablo, not Ahmed, not Omar, right? Nobody's responsible for this. Not Christia Freeland. She's a Rhodes Scholar, don't you know? Oh my goodness. So here, I got this sent to me recently. And this is the Scarborough Charter. And it is about inserting anti-Black racism and Black inclusion in Canadian higher education. And this is the document, the Principles, Actions, and Accountabilities for a National Dialogue and Action for Inclusive Higher Education in Communities. This is the framework that's being used, and I don't have the time to go through it right now. It's 22 pages. You can find it on CanadaPoly.com. It's just a direct link to the PDF if you're interested in digging into that a little bit. Maybe I'll do a little page dedicated to it. I think it's important. This is the strategy. They desperately want to make this part of being a good citizen. It's unbelievable. Brenda Lucky as well. This is the last tab for today. Brenda Lucky calls for her resignation are starting to be heard after her disastrous display over the last couple of days. Duncan D says, must read from Tim. She's lucky in charge of a big complex organization, so she can't possibly know the details of what happened in Portapique and after. She has people attending to these details, but she can't say who those people are or what they've done. So this is a piece from a Nova Scotia journalist talking about the Commissioner Lucky must be fired. She must go because she's incompetent and clearly compromised and clearly trying to protect the ministers and the Prime Minister from political fallout from their disastrous plans to use the shooting as a political tool to get support for their gun laws, their gun orders in council, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the state of our government. Our government is an absolute disastrous mess, and it doesn't seem like there's really any will to fix it in a way that we're going to see any changes in the short term. To me, anyway. Jagmeet Singh is just fine with supporting these people. The people who are in charge of the government apparatus don't see anything wrong with what they're doing. And because of all that, they're not going to change what they're doing. And because of that, we're not going to have any change. I don't see it anyway. If I start to see it, I'll let you know. You'll be the first to know. All right, that's enough out of me. My son wants to play basketball, and that would be very loud for you. So I'm going to finish the show here and stop talking. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out Speaking Moistly and all the interviews I do on there. And have a wonderful, wonderful day.